We have further evidence that indeed Trump and his administration did know how bad COVID was well before it exploded. According to the New York Times, on February 24th, Trump's economic team privately addressed the Hoover Institution, this is a right-wing group, and implied that a COVID outbreak could prove worse than advisors were signaling to the public. Aides appeared to be giving wealthy party donors an early warning. This is on top of the Bob Woodward phone call where we heard the audio where Trump said to him directly, early on, oh, this is way worse than the flu. This is worse than even your, quote, strenuous flus, as he said. And he very clearly laid out how, yeah, I'm downplaying it. Like, I'm lying, but the reason I'm doing that is because I don't want to panic people. This is also on top of, we learned that the post office had developed a plan and were ready to go, sending, I believe it was 5 masks, reusable masks, to all Americans. They were ready to do it. Trump stepped in and said, no, I'm going to stop this. Because again, I don't want to panic people. Those 2 stories alone are beyond gigantic and are everything. And I think the Biden team should stress that endlessly, because the reason Trump is doing so poorly in the polls is because of his abysmal failure on COVID and by extension the economy. But now we know this is like the cherry on top of the shit cake. There's a reason why they did this. Why did they get a bunch of wealthy Republican donors at the Hoover Institution? And why did they tell them, hey, here's the deal, guys, just so you know, this is going to be bad skis. Why did they do that? Money. This is exactly like Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, who sold $20 million in stock after a meeting with other Republican politicians in a January briefing, and they learned, hey, this is going to be bad. So what did she do? She dumped stocks knowing the market would dive, $20 million worth, and then also, this part is maybe even worse, she bought stocks in companies that have benefited from the pandemic. Sell the stocks that you know you're going to lose on. Buy the stocks that are going to do well in the pandemic. So they knew. And now we know it wasn't just other politicians who got the message. They met with wealthy donors and were like, just so you know, this might help you with your portfolio. Let me tell you a little something here about your investments. This is going to be bad. This pandemic's going to be bad. So act accordingly. In other words, sell the stocks that are going to tank, buy stocks that might do well in a pandemic. They knew the entire time. They were lying to the public and blocking masks from being sent to people. How is somebody supposed to feel reading this story, learning about this, when they didn't know, they were lied to repeatedly, and the entire pandemic, they only got one $1,200 COVID check? And now, we'll get to these numbers later, but over 30% of the country says it's very likely I'll be evicted within the next 2 months. 8 million people have slipped into poverty. So as the entire country, average people across the country, are struggling, fired, or taking pay cuts. Know people who died from this or who got very, very sick and are still having side effects. All those people. And you're going to tell me this is what you were doing behind closed doors? This is how you were approaching the situation? So for them, they get maximum security, knowledge, tips on what to do with their stocks. By the way, that in theory, that's illegal, right? So they get everything they need. But they treat you with zero respect. They downplay it, they deflect, and they screw you economically. All the while, I didn't even mention, the bailouts overwhelmingly went to the corporations. You had the Fed doing $1 trillion a day in quantitative easing to prop up the stock market as people get laid off. If this doesn't radicalize you, if this doesn't open your eyes as to what's really going on in this country, I don't know what will. Because this is class war. Class war is politicians telling other politicians, make some money off this pandemic. It's going to get bad. Also with the wealthy donors, them telling wealthy donors, same thing. It's almost like it's a giant club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin famously said. That's exactly what this is. That's exactly what this is. And so now, again, I don't know how many more stories we need to show you, but this is the reality. The reality is they did know about the pandemic. They realized it was going to be a disaster. Even Trump did. You know, there was an argument early on, and maybe I'm naive, but there was an argument early on of like, he's just an idiot and he doesn't really know. Wrong. That's too kind to them. He's a liar. He's a nefarious liar. They are nefarious liars. They knew how bad it was going to be, and they downplayed it on purpose as they and their buddies were getting rich off of it. Getting rich off of it. In other words, they handled this in the most comic book villain way imaginable. That's the truth. That's the truth. Now, you do with that information whatever you want, but I think it's a little bit of a scandal that these are not the things that are being highlighted the most. I mean, I do think that this feeds into why Trump is so far down, because he's failed so bad on COVID, but it's even bad. It's even worse than just failing. It was nefarious. It was nefarious. Yes, it's happening. Yes, we know it's going to happen. I'm going to block the masks from being sent out, and I'm going to make sure all my buddies get rich. And if you get screwed, so be it. I don't really care that much.